Hi, I'm Yeju Choi. I am a designer and I teach design at Yale University. Well, I should say I've been teaching there since 2012. It's been almost 10 years. And I was a student in the graduate program from '07 to '09. And today I am not going to show anything, just like a true Yale designer. I'm going to talk. It's funny because we always say to the students, like show, don't tell. But I'm just gonna tell and not show anything. Hopefully, so you can think of it as people on Zoom, you can think of it as like a podcast or whatever. You can like do your thing. I'm gonna talk about something that's quite specific to, I guess, my experience at Yale, but yeah, but I'm curious how other people think about this. So there you go. So the other day, I was doing a desk crit with a student, a first-year graphic design MFA student. And while talking about their project, I asked, why is this interesting? And their response was, why does it have to be interesting to anyone? And well, my brain or my heart froze for a second. I was like, yeah, a good question. But then soon I was like, why do anything? Like, why live? Like I actually said that. Of course, I was joking a little bit, but I was also serious. This question of why is something I think about a lot, and maybe to an unhealthy degree, and it is what I want to talk about today. But before going into that, I want to tell you the rest of the conversation because there were some things I needed to clarify at that moment. So I said, well, maybe you might be misunderstanding my question here. I'm not saying this isn't interesting. I'm asking why this is interesting to you, right? Which aspect of it? How do you see it? How do you approach it? And what does it mean to you? And I'm asking these questions so that you can think about this, like you can ask these questions yourself and become curious about and hopefully aware of what kind of designer, thinker, and maker you are or can be. And I'm here to help you explore and develop that further. So this, all I'm saying here, this approach, this deeply individual and person-centered approach may sound familiar to some of you, I don't know, who went to certain graduate schools at a certain era. At least to me, this is one of the sort of quintessential Yale graphic design pedagogy that Sheila LeBron nurtured. And we can talk more about where that's from. I don't know, like postmodern, feminism, all of that. But anyways, it's been one of the strong foundations of my learning and teaching and practice. As a student, I think I held on to it even more tightly than my peers, probably, because I had come to Yale as a student in 2007 after studying graphic design and worked as a designer in Seoul, South Korea. I guess we're talking a lot about Seoul. I'm not going to really talk too much about Korea. But I studied at Seoul National University and worked at a huge corporation in Seoul as a graphic user interface designer. I know that's pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone era UI design. Anyway, there, no one would ask questions like these. Nobody cared about what I thought about what we were doing, right? Especially if that thinking was critical in any way. It seemed like there's only doing what we're doing, kind of, or what you're supposed to do. There's not even a question of how we do it, let alone why. So coming to Yale, where I could or was actually expected to critically reflect on these questions. This discipline, industry, or is the field of study called graphic design. You know, that's and not only that, you can explore and experiment with what kind of designer I am for 2 years. I mean, it was like a dream. It was so liberating and terrifying at the same time. But I so welcomed how everything I had known about design being taken apart and challenged, so I could build something new and solid, yet flexible and resilient, so I can go back out into the world with. You know, I knew exactly what kind of privilege it was, and I do always make a point of my students know that. So this is probably what Lorraine Weil called it, the expanded practice 3.0 in Jeff's book, in her essay in this book. It encouraged personal, poetic, exploratory, kitschy, messy ways of designing, and personal voice and agency. And it all resulted in a plurality of visual languages, which was so exciting. However, I think this introspective and person-centered approach seems to have some pitfalls based on my experience and my observations for the last 10 years or so, which takes us back to the desk crit and my students' question or response. Why does anything have to be interesting? So this question made me wonder, what level of concern or curiosity about the audience, the engagement, the communication, and of course the bigger context of the society and why we do what we do the average MFA students have? Once you've found your voice, your methodology, your thesis, your thing, then what happens? Coincidentally, last night, actually, my now you can tell I wrote this last night. Last night, my former graduate student from a few years ago was texting me asking about a very practical work-related question. And they said something about, oh, this like tedious day job or something. And I asked, oh, like, where do you work now? And they wrote, like, I'm on the phone. They wrote, after more than a few seconds of just like ... like really thinking about what they should say. After a few seconds of ... the message was, ha ha, I'm embarrassed. And then they said the name of this company, this huge corporation. And I was like, no, don't be embarrassed. Like, totally fine. Like, you're experiencing things. But I just like couldn't stop thinking about this. Like, why is this embarrassing to this person, right? And I say that especially because on the flip side of that, on the other side of this, I don't think it's like that much better. I'm gonna quote what Stuart Bertolletti Bailey called orphaned interest in his essay, or actually I found this in the interview, titled A Terminal Degree. I'm quoting, the uncommercial counterpart is generally drawn from someone's personal niche interests with no real profit motive and no urgent need for an audience either. Such production inevitably foster a certain amount of community and goodwill, and it would be churlish to see this as negative. but in being so self-serving, they're not really socially oriented in that former sense either. So really, are these the only two options that the people after their graduation see in graphic design? Over the years, I've had many MFA graduates actually come talk to me about similar frustrations. It's usually a year or two after graduation, and after they experience the real world and realize how different the reality is from what they experience or what they encouraged to do at school. So what I usually say is, well, first of all, I usually say, yep, it's about time. I've been expecting you. And I say this just to say that you're not alone, right? In a way, it's a good thing because it means you've transformed as a designer. You're clearer about your expectations. You want to do certain things in a certain way. You have some criticality in your thinking, while the world has remained exactly the same. So feeling that dissonance in a very visceral way, I think is a great thing. But the thing is, now it is, well, out of the school, it is your job to now kind of shift and synthesize your thesis, your method, your ideals with various contexts, real contexts of the real world, and find a way to apply yourself in a new way. There's no perfect job, no kind of smooth path already paved for your thing, whatever that is. So all of this to say, or ask all of you, when we encourage our students to find their own visual language or method, or ask them to work on self-initiated projects, I have a feeling that something may be missing, or being misunderstood, or being out of proportion. Because to me, we teach our students to be self-aware and self-driven and self-organizing, hoping that this self and this kind of person-centered approach don't just end there at the very self, and certainly not at their own personal projects. My hope is that approach, that empathy, that attention to turn around inside out and expand outward. So how could we inspire the students to expand this self-hyphenated approach to issues and matters that are bigger and real? So usually when I'm talking to these graduates who are frustrated with this disconnect, I ask very gently, what do you think the social purpose of your work is? In other words, can you think of why this work, your thing, and your role exists or should exist in a bigger social context, in the real world that concerns real people's lives? Just to be clear, I'm not saying quit your evil corporate job, or I'm not saying like stop making your little Rezo flyers for a party in Bushwick and go work for mission-driven nonprofit. I'm not saying that. I think these are all great things and somebody has to do that, right? Nor I'm talking about social design, because I always thought that term was funny. I don't know who uses it. I've read it in many essays and things like this. Although, well, full disclosure, I do say socially engaged practice when I talk about my work, especially just for the context, especially for my community-based public art projects or my sort of longer term collaborations with civic and public organizations. So I admit that, but it's social design is funny because isn't design inherently social? Unless you're just doing the orphaned interest thing in your room. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not talking really about design single-handedly changing the world. I actually don't think that way. Definitely not saying we should all think like William Morris, Jan van Toorn, Victor Papanek, or even like Bucky Fuller, you know, like, although it would be cool if more people did that. And I'm not talking about the First Things First manifesto. I actually quite enjoy what Michael Bay wrote as like footnotes to the manifesto. Anyways, if you haven't read it, it's interesting. He obviously didn't sign it. I guess I'm talking about paying attention to the everyday and real lives and kind of, I don't know, like being curious about the mechanisms of our society and be creative about where our work can fit, like beyond this discipline. Because to me, what makes graphic design endlessly interesting is how it's intertwined with the world. And it's about, you know, it's about shifting the focus from that thing that you make and how they're represented to the actual like moments of encounters and the real lives these things will have for a longer period of time, and what kind of relationships that these things would have. And you know what's funny, that was actually my thesis at Yale. And also, I mean, when it comes to people and every day, it's also how to engage with the people you work with, right? Whether you call them clients or commissioners, as Irma Boom would always say, commissioners or collaborators. To me, it's like how can, again, I'm not changing the world through design. I am using design to help these people who are already doing the good work to do the work better. So, in a way, what's the shared purpose here, right? Like, what are we doing together and how can I contribute? And that, in a way, is still my person-centered approach, but to public problems. So going back to teaching, on my part as an educator, I'm going to keep bringing up the importance of contextualizing your learning and your work. And that context is actually not just like, what kind of design you do, but more the social, cultural, political, and even like economic context of specific works, and the why, the purpose. Because I think eventually that's what drives you in a long run. And this purpose can be totally subjective. I have my understanding of what graphic design is and how it should work and what kind of purposes it should serve for the world, to be ambitious. But all of that dictates how I operate as a designer and as a person too. So finding their own ways to engage with the world is basically what I encourage each student to be self-initiated about. I want to end with a paragraph in the prospectus for the West of England College of Art, written by Richard Hollis and Norman Potter in 1964. It's something that I it's something that's kept me grounded as someone who teaches design. And one of my favorite definitions of design. Design is a field of concern, response, and inquiry as much as decision and consequence. To a known and defined sense of situation, the student must bring an awareness of his position, a constant search for a place of value in the world of facts, and a full command of the tools and techniques with which he can validate his intuitions. That's it. That's my little stand-up here. Thank you.